Hello there, my name is Dr. Daniel Couch. I'm a medical doctor working in the UK, and I'm also the medical lead at the Centre for Medicinal Cannabis. And today we'll be discussing the state of play of medical cannabis in the UK. And I'm joined by our panel. I'd like to introduce Dr. Aisha Mayan, who's a medical doctor working in the UK, who's also got extensive experience in policy developments, both in Europe and at the World Health Organization level. And also Ben Langley, who is the CEO of Grow Group. To start off, for our audience, it may be useful to talk through where we have got to in medical cannabis in the UK. Prior to November 2008, medical cannabis was not able to be prescribed. It was what's called a Schedule 1 drug. It was considered to have no therapeutic benefit and therefore was not prescribable by any doctor to any patient in the UK. Despite a flourishing illegal market for cannabis on the street, many patients were frustrated that they couldn't get it from their doctor. One patient in particular was Charlotte Caldwell, who had a sick son, who was a little boy with a refractory epilepsy, and out of desperation for her son, went to Canada to obtain a medical prescription to control his seizure activity. In November 2018, this mother brought her child back to the UK with this medicine, and this medicine was then confiscated at Heathrow Airport. The little boy became very unwell, got admitted to hospital, and after a short argument, essentially a group of us got together and through various mechanisms approached the Home Secretary, the senior level of government in the UK, and obtained a change in the law, moving cannabis from a Schedule 1 drug to a Schedule 2 drug, whereby it can now be prescribed by a specialist. Dr. Mian, if I could ask you, since the change in the law in 2018, so cannabis can now be prescribed by a patient, by a doctor for a patient, how have things changed since then for patients and doctors?
Probably not as much as we would like. So we have these guidelines that have come out since then, a little bit afterwards, the NICE guidelines, and they basically give quite a narrow range of indications for which they can be prescribed cannabis-based medical products. So we have nabilone for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, which is mostly THC. We've got Sativex, which is THC and CBD, and that's mostly for spasticity in MS. And we have Epidiolex, which is mostly CBD for a very rare form of epilepsy, Lennox-Gastaut and Dravet syndrome. So we have these indications that it can be prescribed for, but actually in reality, there's been barely a handful of prescriptions that have gone out on the NHS, and more so, but still very few that have come out privately, which end up costing quite a lot. So despite it having been made legal, and it has been legal for about 2 years, there is still a long way to go in terms of accessibility and doctors being able to prescribe it as well.
Okay, so we'll break down for our audience what the role of NICE is and how healthcare is set up in the UK in a moment. But I'd like to move to you, Ben, if you wouldn't mind. Perhaps you could just give us a brief introduction to Grow Group, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so Grow Group, our mission is essentially solving some of the issues that Aisha just pointed to. So our mission is to get cannabis to the patients that need it. We're a UK headquartered biopharma group. We just do cannabis. It's our sole focus. And we do it across a few different sort of divisions and operations. So our view is that the cannabis supply chain has a number of issues that need to be solved. As a new medicine to the UK, certainly in the last 80 years anyway, the supply chains just don't exist. The education of healthcare professionals hasn't been done. And so Grow exists to solve those issues. So we do a few different things. We've got a research and development lab in the middle of England. We've got import dispensing of cannabis medicines. So we've got our own pharmacy. But importantly, I think one of the things that we take a lot of pride in is actually the education piece. So talking with healthcare professionals, talking with doctors, talking with pharmacists, regulators to some extent, and providing them with the knowledge to empower a positive prescribing decision. So again, if you believe as we do that there are tens, if not sort of hundreds of thousands or hundreds of billions of patients globally that could benefit from cannabis medicines, then really what we do is focus on the blockers. And education, the ability to actually prescribe confidently is a serious blocker that we focus on. So We were sort of first movers in the UK back in 2018. We're actually established in 2017 before legalization. We've got a decent market share in terms of distribution now. But I think really importantly, we're very keen to sort of collaborate with industry to really push this market forwards.
And so that's a great introduction. So from an industry point of view, how does medical cannabis look in the clinic?
So, as Aisha said, it's principally a private market at the moment, which means the government doesn't pay for the patient's medicine. So that in the UK is actually reasonably rare. Generally, it's a state-backed market. So that creates a problem, obviously, of accessibility to many patients in terms of costs. So there's a cost to get to a clinic. That costs a reasonable sum of money to a normal individual. And then there's the cost of the medicine itself. So those two things are costly. I think there is a bit of a misperception around the actual level of the cost. So one of the issues we've seen is actually awareness. And actually there's both a lack of awareness of patients that cannabis is actually an option for them at the moment. But also for those that actually are aware that they can get cannabis as a medicine that may help any given indication they have. That there's a sort of misconception that the price of that cannabis is prohibitive. And so often patients actually don't engage in the process or engage with their doctors because of some of that lack of education. So it's one of the things that we and others in the industry are quite focused on. We obviously we can't advertise because it's an unlicensed medicine in the UK, and so advertising cannabis medicines is prohibited, and rightly so. But actually just making people aware, so sort of not-for-profit campaigns, dealing with some of the patient groups, those sort of pan-industry sort of goals and pan-industry cooperation initiatives are very important. But in terms of how the market looks, it's a small market, as Aisha said. Right now, it's probably something like 1,000 patients. It was probably 100 patients last year. I think it'll be many more next year. So it's growing. It will be significant, but there's a lot of work to get it there.
Okay, thank you. And so there are many factors, and we've touched on a couple of them to discuss here. So there are many barriers and problems in the medical cannabis industry in the UK and getting these medicines to patients. For our audience, it may be useful to discuss some of these. And so the first to discuss is that the UK is, by and large, 97% of medicine that goes on in the UK is done so in the public sector and is funded through government through what's called the National Health Service, which I'm sure our audience have all heard of. This poses a particular issue in the direction of a publicly funded healthcare system, in that new medicines must be approved and assessed individually. And though if the benefit of a medicine is small and the cost is high, it's much more likely that fund will be transferred elsewhere to a more effective medicine. And cannabinoid medicines are this new group of medicines which are going through this drug approval process. In the UK, that happens through the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, or NICE. It was established in 1999 and goes through the assessment of these novel medicines and decides whether they are useful in the public healthcare setting or not, or whether they should be prescribed. Essentially, if NICE approves the prescription of a drug for any particular indication, that by and large is taken up by the medical prescribing community. I was wondering if, Aisha, could you just talk us through the doctor attitude towards guidance that's issued by NICE? Is it Bible, is it gospel, or is it taken with a pinch of salt?
I think it depends what level you're at. So for sure, most levels for most people, it almost is sort of Bible. People that will maybe deviate a little bit or experiment are probably like consultants who are the top level specialists who have a lot of experience, and their experience can sort of help them maybe it gives them more confidence to be able to deviate from them. But otherwise, majority of doctors will go by NICE as much as is possible. That is like the ultimate guideline.
I mean, that certainly is my experience. I mean, if NICE guidance recommends or doesn't recommend the prescription of a drug, by and large, 90% of doctors in the UK will follow that guidance, and they really do prescribe in a kind of an autonomous yet heard fashion.
So, if you don't mind, do you think, Aisha, that there's a willingness to can education help with that? I mean, I'm sure it can to a degree, but do you think that we could get wholesale acceptance from doctors outside of NICE with a massive education program. I mean, to what degree can sort of education move the dial there, do you think?
Oh man, you're talking about doctors. it's There's so much to say about how you want to educate doctors on something specifically like cannabis, because it's so different to what we're taught about and the way we're taught about how to practice medicine and how medicines are and the way we're supposed to prescribe them. It kind of doesn't quite fit the traditional mold of, you know, things going through trials and whatever else that we're used to. And already what we're going to read in books, what you mostly read in your textbooks, or, you know, even what you're hearing, I mean, like, I don't know if we want to talk about this later, but even what we're hearing in like teachings, it's still a lot of the old like stereotypes and a lot of the old tropes, and there is not even like the concept of understanding that there is such a thing as the endocannabinoid system even. So there's a long way to go, really. And on top of that, you have to just remember, like, as much as we would say, yes, of course, education is really important, like, we have to really incentivize it for doctors as well, because there is so much that we have to learn. Like you still go through at least a decade of training after you finish med school, you know, and you're still continuing to learn. So where is the incentive going to come in from that to really learn about something like this?
Yeah, and I think that certainly in my clinical experience is that, you know, NICE has been around for about 20 years. And obviously medicine has been around for a lot longer than NICE has. And not everything that we do and prescribe has been endorsed by NICE. There are certainly things we have inherited historically, some medicines and some procedures that have not gone through this drug approval process and are still in practice. I think when a new medicine comes on the scene, like any of their cannabis-based medical products, I think because in the UK doctors are so conservative and want to minimize risk to their patients as appropriate, I think that they will always fall back on NICE guidance when it comes to these novel medicines. I think that providing education to doctors is crucial, and it's definitely a big problem in the uptake of cannabis medical prescribing. Doctors are very unlikely in the UK to prescribe new medicines if they feel they don't have the competence to do so, if they don't know what the risks and benefits are, or the indications, or even the dose. And so an education program, I think you're right, is crucial to effectiveness. However, I think that the vast majority of doctors will still fall back on NICE guidance. And Dr. Mayan, I was going to ask you, so you said that, you know, NICE did recommend these small group of products, so Nabilone for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, Sativex for spasticity and MX, and also Epidiolex, which is just CBD for Lennox-Gastaut syndrome or Dravet syndrome. Why was there not more evidence? Why was there not more recommendations from NICE about the prescribing of other cannabis medical products? Because it would seem, you know, we know that from a study we did, there's about 1.4 million people in the UK who use cannabis off the street to treat their symptoms for their medical problem. And yet the guidance released by NICE is very conservative and very narrow. So why was further guidance not issued?
So as far as I understand it, and obviously correct me if I'm wrong, there's like sort of two factors in here. Number one is the quality of the evidence and the way they define like the quality of the evidence that's presented. So even though like technically there is a lot of work and there is a lot of evidence from all around the world that they can include and have included, it's like, how do they fit in with this sort of a double blinded, placebo controlled trial, like an RCT type trial? So if it doesn't fit into this sort of mold of this type of evidence, then how much value you can take from its conclusions is obviously going to be limited. So I think that is a limiting factor. Number one, it's just how much of that kind of quality of evidence exists. And then the other thing as well is obviously like the cost effectiveness as well, I think. So obviously the NHS is a publicly funded service, and if it's going to cost too much, it's, and on top of the fact that we have got COVID and a lot of hospitals are struggling to just manage that. So, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
And Dr. Mian, you graduated within the last 2 years from a British medical school.
No, I qualified from a Polish medical school.
I'm sorry, European medical school, or European for the next month or so.
Yeah.
What education did you receive about medical cannabis as an undergraduate, if any at all?
No. It's still very anti any kind of drugs. It's still pretty regressive, the kind of things I was hearing from lecturers. And to be honest, even during my training now, obviously I'm still in training in the UK, just there's nothing. I am even afraid to say the word cannabis, like in my workplace, to even admit that I'm interested in this, despite having such a long-standing background in history and, you know, understanding of what this is. And I know I understand more than the doctors around me. I'm still afraid to say it because, you know, I did 2 lectures actually, one for the doctors and one for the pharmacists. And I was trying to get people to come. And I remember, you know, just things like just me saying what my talk was about. It was about the endocannabinoid system. Number one, they don't even know that there is such a thing as an endocannabinoid system. And the fact that the word had something vaguely cannabis in it, the first thing that was said to me was, "Are you a stoner?" You know? And this is from other doctors who are more senior than me. And this is, you know, I myself feel the fear and the stigma of even talking about this.
Yeah, I mean, certainly my PhD research was on endocannabinoid physiology in inflammatory bowel disease, and it was as scientific and as dry as you can get, but it still would raise eyebrows in a clinical setting. And certainly, I've been through, or just been through, a 10-year specialist training program, and not once have I had any kind of formal education about the endocannabinoid system, which we now know is important in health and disease. So we've talked about that there's an evidence gap, and that needs to be satisfied prior to any nice guidance. We talked about doctor education and doctor attitudes about cannabis. Ben, it will be useful to talk about supply chains and distribution in the UK. Could you give us an idea of how that works in the UK and what problems there are?
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, the majority of medicines are imported from actually all over the world. So Australia, Canada, various EU countries, but there's a fairly big sort of reliance on imported medicines. So, and that's important to know because the import regulations in the UK have been quite difficult to navigate. And to be honest, it's fairly typical of the problems with cannabis in the UK, which we're all working to solve. The government, for some reason, decided that cannabis should be treated, well, not completely differently, but somewhat differently to other medicines. So it's easier to import an opiate than it is to import cannabis, which I think to the three of us would seem crazy, but it unfortunately is the case because cannabis is new and opiates in medicine aren't. So I think it's conversations with government that will improve over time, but they are sort of slow and difficult conversations. But the supply chain, to your question, is improving, is working. I think probably in 2019, when there was a policy from the government that you could only bring in cannabis on a prescription not prescription at a time, but on if you had some 10 prescriptions, you could bring in just for those 10 prescriptions and nothing else. So the prescription had to be written, then you could bring the medicine in. So that doesn't really work for just-in-time medicine when you're importing from a country that has to issue an export license, then your government has to issue an import license. What you have is patients sat there without medicine. So it was quite a almost sad situation with a number of patients going without medicine for months, which was completely unacceptable. So we worked hard with the government, as did other industry players, and got those regulations changed. I say we include the CMC in this, obviously. And thankfully in March 2020, just when COVID was actually picking up, unfortunately, the regulations changed. So now it's much easier to import, but it's still not as easy as it should be. There's also a growing sort of manufacturing base in the UK. So we've got the ability to actually manufacture medicines, but even there we need to import the component parts to actually manufacture those medicines. The good thing about that clearly is the more of the supply chain that can be in the UK, the more reliable that will be, because importing is notoriously difficult for shipping reasons or for regulatory reasons or whatever it may be. So gradually, I think there's more and more actually domestic cannabis industry in the UK, and that's a big opportunity for patients and for industry.
So it seems therefore we have this kind of developing regulatory framework, which is at the moment not quite producing, native cannabis, if you like, from the UK to satisfy the supply chains, but it is improving.
Yeah, I think that's right. So the import regs are improved, but very far from perfect. So that's an ongoing workflow. Export regs, interestingly, actually don't exist, which is, as an industry player, sort of quite frustrating, and actually also has a knock-on effect with patients. So at the moment, we can import cannabis. We can potentially, subject to licenses, grow and manufacture cannabis in the UK, although that's yet to happen on scale outside of GW Pharma, which is a bit of a special case. But what we can't do is actually bring in cannabis and export it, or even grow it in this country and export it, again, unless it's a licensed medicine, which is what GW have. And so it's quite an incredible situation if you think about Brexit and the government saying that we're very keen to have Britain as a trading nation, even when we're outside of the EU. And yet a brand new, exciting industry that's both a huge opportunity for patients and for industry. And actually, we're not allowed to actually export a product. When we can export, again, opiates or other things that are arguably sort of far worse for people. So it's a really strange situation. And I think, to be honest, it's not that I don't blame the government, but I do understand the hesitance to sort of dive straight in and just open everything up. But I think what's important is that industry and doctors and patients, to some extent, engage with the government and just help them get to the right place. So that's what we're trying to do.
It sounds like then, because obviously Brexit is an internationally renowned process now, I should imagine. Brexit provides some opportunities for us then in terms of exporters you discussed, perhaps?
I think so. I not name dropping, but I was in the Financial Times a few months back saying almost exactly that, which is that, look, we've got an opportunity here. I mean, Grow is looking to raise money at the moment, and it's actually a statement of facts that we will invest most of that money into the UK if we can export, and if we can't, then unfortunately we're going to have to set up a European hub, and so that will then facilitate sort of European business, and obviously will help European patients, and great. But the disconnect between our UK supply chain and our European supply chain just doesn't make any sense. So these are real sort of almost common sense logic points that I think need to be argued. But I understand the government stance. I understand the sort of slowly approach, but it does impact patients. And that's where I think it's important that it is thought about very hard.
Absolutely. Completely agree. Now, we have all been talking about the problems with medical cannabis. We're all here essentially to get safe and effective medicines to patients when they need them, where they're going to be useful. And so let's talk about the promise. And so we said there's only maybe a couple of thousand prescriptions for medical cannabis that have been issued in the UK so far, almost all of them in the private sector, which is a very small proportion of prescriptions in the UK. Moving cannabis into a effective prescribing framework within the National Health Service really is the key. And so what scope is there then? So I'll start with you, Dr. Meow. So what scope is there for the UK to be a prescriber of medical cannabis in the UK? Do you think there is much demand amongst the patient community for these medicines in the appropriate fashion?
Well, it was your report that said there's almost 1.4 million people who are using it medicinally, but not accessing it in probably like legitimate ways. And I just want to make the point that if we're not accessing it legitimately, that in itself has a lot of problems, not just from like human right and ethical and point of view, but also the quality. And if people are going to be using it, shouldn't we be providing it in a safe way for them to use it? So I think the UK has a lot of potential to be a leader. We have really strong research institutions. We have strong pharma industry. I think there's a lot of potential. NHS is an absolutely amazing service that exists and can effectively, help patients access something that they really need. But obviously it's going to need a lot more sort of leadership, and there's a lot of these other little things that we've been talking about that are going to need to come into place. But I do think UK has the potential, we can carry on.
No, I was going to say, I agree. I think that the UK certainly has a lot of leadership potential to really, we're almost lucky in the UK in a sense in that we have not inherited a medical cannabis framework. We're starting from scratch, and yet have the ability to look at what other jurisdictions and other countries have done so far and learn from what's worked for them and what hasn't worked for them.
Can I just say as well that we have the potential to go even better than that as well, and learn from the mistakes and some of the issues that have come up in other countries that have had it for longer than we have as well. IDPC actually just came out with a really nice document that's really easy to read, and it's like gives out like 20 core principles of legal regulation for like cannabis industry, and you know, it makes sure that it's going to be ethical, sustainable, you know, incorporates human rights, like all of the things that really we want, and I think the world wants right now as well. So we have the potential to take on these like really nice principles and really become like a world leader, and other countries can follow our lead if we can do it right.
And Ben, so the UK does have certain attributes in its quiver that we could use to bring us to being a world leader in the prescribing of medical cannabis. Could you just run through what some of those attributes are?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you said it really well. But yeah, look, we've got, in addition to the sort of pharma framework, I guess to take a step back with any industry, you need infrastructure, you need skill sets of people, you need supportive regulations. There's probably a few other points, but those are the 3 points that sort of spring to mind as principal advantages that would again sort of give you an advantage. So I think in terms of actually the ability to raise money as well, we've got very supportive capital markets. We've got a great entrepreneurial class, a lot of people looking to start businesses and doing interesting things that are able to sort of support the industry. But I think we've historically been a life sciences leader globally. We've got a lot of big firms here, a lot of clever people, a lot of infrastructure. So there's absolutely every reason why we would be successful in this industry. As I said, I think the one at the moment that's just holding us back just slightly is regs, and I've said that a lot, so I don't want to harp on that point. But I think outside of the regulations right now, every other aspect of sort of almost British, the way Britain is set up, historic skill sets, I think would be supportive of a very sort of outward, globally facing and leading cannabis industry.
Completely agree. I think Plant the Flag for Britain, I think we have a good heritage of research and development infrastructure, and also, as you say, a strong pharmaceutical heritage and a very large potential market. Ben, could I ask you then, so where do you see medical cannabis evolving over the next, say, 5 years in the UK?
Yeah, good question. And I guess, again, maybe some of what we've said at times has been a little bit negative, but I think the industry has been definitely sort of growing up, maturing, and we're seeing more prescriptions on a monthly basis at the moment. So just talking about grow, I think in August and September, the prescriptions month on month doubled both of those months. So the private market as it is currently is definitely gaining traction. And if you look at the Australian growth curve, so there's various reasons that the Australian experience with medical cannabis is quite similar to the UK in terms of their regulations. So you look at that growth curve and it suggests that actually you can get to a pretty sizable private market with the sort of regulations we've got now. So the Australian market is something like, I believe it's 30,000 patients off the top of my head. The UK, I think, is 3 times bigger than Australia. We're just probably 18 months behind. So I think the private market can be significant even with some of the constraints that we've talked about from a regulatory perspective. And I think that will happen. I think as well, we're seeing sort of real time a lot of focus now on evidence collection, so real world evidence, which is essentially sort of day-to-day unlicensed medicines prescribed and people recording their experiences. So I think that will be very helpful with NICE. But as we've talked about as well, the sort of the randomized clinical trials, the good old-fashioned way that medicines are generally approved, I think they are happening. I know they're happening. And I think over the next few years, the results of those will start to come in, and that will drive NICE acceptance, which will drive NHS acceptance. So if 5 years is the question, I don't necessarily think there will be wholesale NHS prescribing in 5 years. I think that's probably aggressive. But I think number one, the private market will be very big. And well, certainly bigger than it is now, much bigger. And number two, there will be some prescribing on the NHS and more than the 5 prescriptions we just talked about. So I think there's a lot of room for optimism. And then also just obviously the outward looking thing as well. I would expect regulations to loosen up and us to be able to easily do business in all the countries of the world, which will be good as well.
Lovely. And Dr. Mayan, if I could lastly ask you, so you see patients face to face at the clinical coalface. How do you see the kind of face-to-face prescribing or the interplay between patient and doctor changing around medical cannabis over the next 5 years?
Well, I hope that doctors can be more understanding of the patient experience, because right now, especially, like, they do have more knowledge, and well, a lot of them seem to have a lot more knowledge and experience than most of us do. So I hope that doctors themselves can get better educated and work more closely with patients, and, you know, hopefully we can help facilitate their access to it as well, because I've had loads of patients actually that come through, and, you know, right now I'm only in A&E even, so I still have a lot of patients that come in and are using, and I can't say anything, I can't recommend anything. So I would hope in time I would have more power to say and recommend and guide and be able to work with them a lot more closely. And they can in turn have trust that if they come to any medical professionals, they're not going to be shunned or stigmatized, and they can like openly talk about it and get help where they need help.
Lovely. Well, Dr. Aisha Mayan and Ben Langley from Grow Group, thank you for joining us today. I'd just like to finish by saying that the Centre for Medicinal Cannabis is a member organisation, and we work at the clinical, academic, legislative, and political level to bring medicines closer to patients in the landscape of medicinal cannabis. Thank you for joining us, and we'll hopefully see you again soon.
Thanks very much.
CBD is everywhere. Everybody's seen it, everybody's heard about it. Whether you're talking to your grandmother or your young niece, they all know about CBD. There's multiple product categories that we're looking at currently, including food, vape and cosmetics, and more recently beverages being one of the fastest moving sectors that we're seeing. But what's next? Cannabis is a very complex plant with over 300 compounds within it. Studies are limited. We've found that there's multiple benefits to the plant, and there's a lot of interest in it across the world as both a medicinal product, a health and wellness product, and also a recreational product. many other compounds such as CBG, which within the industry is becoming a well-known compound within the cannabis plant. CBC, terpenes are another aspect that are coming very much to the fore with regards to these types of products. We're seeing products that are being developed with higher bioavailability, and we're also seeing products that are infusing together different adaptogenic herbs, vitamins, minerals, all for the health and well-being of people within the sector, people that want to use these products. For the consumer, the education's reasonably limited. Health claims are not available on products due to the fact that we haven't got the necessary studies, but people are seeing a huge benefit and taking a huge interest in this wonderful plant.
As a product developer, very interested, obviously, in the cascading effects of the changing regulations around the world, the different approaches that different countries have taken with regards to deregulating certain cannabinoids, but keeping others still in a listed status. I come from Canada, where adult use is nationwide at this point. But at the same time, we have a very different approach towards CBD in Canada, where by treating it like other cannabinoids and not differentiating it in any way, it's made it very difficult for consumers to actually access cannabidiol. So we are very excited to be in the UK. We see that the regulatory system there is developing in a way that is going to allow for consumers to have greater access to better quality products. And we look forward to the regulations also opening up over time to allow us to work with more ingredients and create better products that innovate us in essence.